When it comes to first-person shooters, 1998 is mainly remembered as the year when a physicist running late for work took the entire genre by storm. But a few months prior to that, Unreal was the hottest, most revolutionary shooter on the market. Developed by Epic Mega Games as they were known back then, along with Digital Extremes, Unreal was a technical marvel when it released, as it debuted the Unreal Engine in spectacular fashion. You know, the engine that would go on to power games like Deus Ex, and along with its later generations, become one of the most popular game engines that's still used today. Before even starting the game, players got to feast their eyes on this iconic 3D castle flyby during the title screen, which shows off the technology that was so cutting edge at the time.
Oh, just killer graphics.
The first thing that pops into most people's minds when they hear about Unreal these days are probably the engine or Unreal Tournament. But I don't think this should serve as a knock against the original game, other than maybe its age, because Unreal is undoubtedly a classic shooter, with multiple aspects that make it stand out from its genre predecessors. And I think it still holds up really well, even though it's had the misfortune of falling out of the consciousness of most people these days. Having a less well-received sequel, the decline in popularity of arena shooters like its multiplayer spin-off, and eventually being overshadowed by Half-Life all probably had something to do with this, but it also isn't helped by the fact that Epic has, in more recent years, seemed indifferent towards the game that literally catapulted them towards becoming a major force in the industry. Recently, we've seen other classic 90s shooters get revitalized for modern players. Quake 1 and 2 were remastered, and Doom and Half-Life both received significant updates, while Unreal and Unreal Tournament were delisted from digital stores in 2022. Just a couple of months ago, Epic did start allowing Unreal and the first Unreal Tournament to be downloaded for free from the Internet Archive. And thanks to the community at Old Unreal, there are big unofficial patches available that help these games run flawlessly on modern hardware. So that's definitely something, and I don't want to complain about free games. However, it does still seem a little odd to me that Epic doesn't want to at least list these games on their own store and showcase their legacy a bit more, because Unreal is still really solid. And even though it's old, it was groundbreaking when it released, and I don't think it's the kind of game you should want to hide away or forget about. With that being said, let's get into the actual game. You play as a character known only as Prisoner 849, and you start the game on board a prison transport spaceship, the Vortex Rikers. The bad news is your ship has crashed. The good news is you're freed from your cell, and so are your fellow prisoners. Except they're not doing too well, neither is the crew, and it wasn't just the crash that killed them. The ship crash-landed on the planet Nepali, which is home to the Nali, a primitive alien species who are pacifists despite being absolutely shredded and having 4 arms. They've suffered the misfortune of being conquered and oppressed by the Scar, ruthless and technologically advanced aliens who, it's often pointed out, look like they were plucked straight out of a Predator movie. The Scar are your main adversary throughout the game, but the planet itself has plenty of threats too, along with a host of other enemies, some of whom serve the Scar. As just a prisoner who's crash-landed on an unfamiliar world, your only real mission is to not get murdered and escape the planet. But in order to do so, you can't help but get involved in the conflict between the Nali and Scar. The opening level on the Vortex Rikers does a good job of creating a foreboding atmosphere that foreshadows the struggle ahead of you, with all of the death, destruction, tortured screams in the background, and brief and unclear glimpses of a Scar finishing off the last survivors. But maybe even more impressive here, especially back when Unreal came out, are parts of the actual ship itself, like the bright and flashy equipment and reflective surfaces. The first time I encountered Unreal Engine reflections wasn't here, but in Deus Ex, when you nonchalantly walk past a mirror at the UNATCO base. And it's introduced pretty nonchalantly here too, where your focus is on a health pack or armor pickup, and then you look down and holy shit. This level on board the ship is short, and although you do find your first weapon here, there isn't any combat, but it still definitely gives off the impression that Unreal is going to be another corridor shooter. This illusion is immediately shattered at the start of the next level. At a time when shooters were limited to more confined areas, stepping out into a big natural environment like this was definitely something to behold. It's obviously not as visually impressive today, but it still nails the moment, with music timed to kick in just as you walk out, and animals like birds and rabbits adding some life to the scenery and ambience. Just don't ruin it by stepping on the rabbit. The water looked good enough to want to drown in back in 1998, and it still doesn't look half bad now. As you continue to explore, you'll start to take in the huge scale of your surroundings, which is something that persists throughout the entire game. So much of Unreal's world is large and grand. Big cliffs, massive towers, giant doorways, and there's a ton of verticality within the level design to view some of this from. There are a bunch of places throughout the game where the geography or architecture feels imposing or awe-inspiring thanks largely to its size. Like the level about halfway through the game, the Sunspire, where you travel all the way up an enormous structure the size of an actual skyscraper. Unreal is a big game in terms of overall content too, and probably what jumps out at me the most about the level design is the phenomenal atmosphere and the sheer variety of different places you visit. You explore derelict spaceships, cozy villages, scorching underground mines, formidable castles, temples that aren't quite Tomb Raider-like but still pretty complex, and a lot more. Yeah, part of this was Epic showing off their fancy new engine, like a level that's just a peaceful boat ride, but there's also a real feeling of adventure as you travel across such an assortment of unique areas, especially since they're strung together seamlessly with only a couple of instances where you step into a teleporter. Even after all this time, the environments and the game as a whole has a very polished appearance that's easy to appreciate, and Nepali is such a vibrant and saturated world. Like the boat ride, there are a few other places where you travel through spacious areas without much action, but I never really minded this thanks to the really strong atmosphere, with colorful touches like green-tinted water or purple and teal clouds rolling across a gorgeous night sky. And there are some alien cows grazing around to look at. The ship interiors you explore are also packed with vibrant colors and lighting that still looks impressive in some spots. And even the more grounded Nolly structures have places that don't hold back on the color palette. Not that the whole game is a neon cyberpunk light show. There are more realistic outdoor areas too, a lot of rustic and metallic interiors that still exude a heavy atmosphere. It's also a game that does darkness really well, and relies on it pretty heavily during some levels. Without a flashlight or flares, shadows and darkness are pitch black. And there's no more memorable example of this than the scripted sequence near the beginning when you have your first full-on Scar encounter. Like stepping out of the spaceship at the beginning, Epic gave a grand introduction to Unreal's signature enemy, but here they decided to try and shake you to your core, and it still manages to be really effective. Obviously, Unreal's graphics don't have the same wow factor that they did back in 1998, but its soundtrack absolutely stands the test of time. This music will never get old for me. Some of the composers for Unreal went on to do the soundtrack for Deus Ex, which is one of my favorite soundtracks, and I wouldn't put Unreal's music far behind that. The tracks mesh really well with the environments and sync up nicely with what's happening in-game. They're fluid and catchy with a wide range of melodies and tempos, and the music here is just a thing of legend. The music plays most of the time, and with its quality being so high, it's really the standout. But there are other nice aspects of the audio design too, like the distinct noises the Nolly make so you know when one is nearby. More diabolical screaming off in the distance that reminds you, yeah, this is a bad place. And the weapon sounds are crisp and clean with plenty of kick to them. Story-wise, Unreal doesn't have the level of narrative immersion that a game like Half-Life does, but it's more than something like Quake and still impressive for a 90s shooter. The very first item you pick up at the beginning is a universal translator, which lets you read logs left on corpses, books, signs, or Nolly ruins scattered across the world. They're mainly there to add some lore about the planet and fill you in about some of the other humans who are stranded there. It doesn't take long to figure out that Nepali hasn't exactly been a happy paradise dance party since the Scar arrived. The logs are brief but interesting enough to be effective at what they're trying to do. Many of them detail grim and terrible experiences by the Nolly living under Scar rule. They cling to hope that a savior will show up and free them, and the humans detail their intense struggles in a hostile alien world. This makes it easy to sympathize with their causes and want to turn every Scar you come across into a bouncing pile of giblets. This is greatly enhanced by the environmental storytelling and your interactions with the Nolly. There are more than a few times when you'll see one of them get butchered right in front of you. A lot of the time you can save them, but sometimes that's easier said than done. They usually return the favor if you do by leading you to valuable pickups like armor, a new weapon, or an upgrade for your pistol. And they help out in other situations too, as long as you're not a psycho and start killing them. I kinda wish they were as goofy and ridiculous as the scientists in Half-Life, so you could just not care or even cheer on their demise. But the Nolly are portrayed much more seriously, and their innocence and hopelessness of escaping their fate on their own makes it really suck to see them die or suffer at the hands of the Scar. Although conversely, it does feel pretty gratifying when you save one. But their treatment gets much darker a little further along, when you start seeing them crucified all over the place or stuffed in torture devices. There's some very haunting imagery that hits even harder once you've explored their villages and religious sites and can really appreciate their peaceful nature. When it comes to the gameplay, enemies in Unreal are usually pretty tanky and display some outstanding AI behavior, especially the Scar, who are notorious for being able to dodge your attacks. These guys are a menace. You only get a few hit scan guns, and the bulk of your ammo goes towards slower projectiles, so they're rarely an easy target. Even today, it's still pretty shocking how well they can move around and predict your attacks. And they use other tactics too, like retreating and even playing dead. So unless you remember to double tap, what you thought was a corpse can hop up and start attacking again, which left me almost stupefied the first few times I saw it.
It's alive.
The other enemies aren't quite as smart, but they definitely do inherit some of the same behaviors and employ unique strategies of their own, like using shields or these guys who can temporarily turn on invincibility. Hardly any of the enemies are pushovers. Literally one of your very first encounters are giant brutes who barrel out of a tunnel firing missiles at you, and this pretty much sets the tone for everything else that follows. Even stationary enemies like tentacles can pose a challenge because of their placement and accuracy. And these goddamn pupae who are small but surprisingly fast and vicious, and they like to pop out of the dark. I thought these things were bugs at first, but apparently they're baby Scar heads. It's like taking the annoyance of head crabs and combining it with the Thing. So Unreal lacks the instant gratification of tearing through hordes of weaker enemies like a lot of other shooters offer. But it makes up for this in my mind by giving you a nice sense of accomplishment as you take on more spaced out encounters that are often intense, challenging, and strategic. Some enemies like the massive titans feel more just like a test of how much ammo you have, which I didn't like as much, but sometimes you can use the environment to beat them, which is super satisfying, or just run by them because they're insanely slow. Of course I need to talk about the weapons. Most of the guns in Unreal were reused throughout the Unreal Tournament series, and the popularity those games once enjoyed can give you a good idea of just how fun they are. All but a few are alien weapons with some very creative and unique properties, which along with their diversity, give the combat a distinct feel very unlike a typical military shooter. I think the single most notable aspect of Unreal's arsenal is how much emphasis there is on alternative firing modes. Each weapon has at least one of these, and they don't feel like gimmicks, and provide real strategic options that you can cycle between in the blink of an eye. Like the Stinger, which lets you switch between rapid fire or a punchy spread, so that it's almost like having a machine gun and a shotgun combined. Then there's the Shock Rifle, or ASMD as it's called here, which has a powerful third firing mode where you can shoot the secondary fire with the primary fire to create a big explosion. It takes some practice to do it right, but it's an insanely cool option to have. I'm not going to highlight every weapon here, but I'll talk about a few more of my favorites. The Automag is the second weapon you get, and despite looking like a whatever standard pistol, it's a solid choice straight through to the end of the game, because it's one of the few hit scan weapons that Scar can't dodge, and because it has unlimited range, is incredibly accurate, and there's ammo for it literally everywhere. So if you're far enough away from your target, you can just sit back, snipe, and laugh. There are much better options up close, but its faster secondary fire lets you shoot sideways like a thug, and who doesn't love that? The 8-Ball is Unreal's version of a rocket launcher, but instead of shooting just one rocket at a time, you can fire up to 6. Not 8, but I guess 8-Ball sounds better than 6-Ball. You can launch them in a spread to deal with dodging enemies, or a tight circle for more concentrated damage, and even lock onto enemies. The secondary fire shoots grenades, which I got hooked on using for a while because landing a bunch of these at once is one of the best and only ways to instantly annihilate a Scar, which feels like a breath of fresh air after so many prolonged fights. The Flat Cannon is the big daddy of close-range encounters. Its primary fire launches a quick spread of shrapnel with some serious power, and there's a short-range explosive for its secondary. It's like a shotgun but cooler, and number 1 for me on the fun scale out of all the weapons you get. The Biorifle is for when you feel like dishing out some chemical warfare. You shoot globs of poisonous sludge that can coat surfaces and explode whenever an enemy touches them. And the secondary fire charges up and pumps out a big fat ball of disease. I never really got the hang of using it very effectively, but I think that's more of a me thing, and it's probably the most amusing gun in the game. Except for maybe the Razorjack, which fires bouncing razor blades that can behead enemies, but they can also ricochet off surfaces and give you a nice haircut if you're not careful. It's not one of the more useful guns in the game because of this, but still kinda hilarious. The 8-Ball and Flat Cannon usually give me the most mileage, but the uniqueness and versatility of the other weapons motivates me to want to switch things up pretty often, and they definitely deserve credit for that. Outside of shooting, there's a decent amount of puzzles where you search for a button or a switch to unlock the next area. Most of the levels are relatively straightforward. You might have to backtrack a couple of times or search around for a few minutes, but nothing too crazy. There are definitely a few maze-like levels though, which are a lot more challenging. Thankfully, there aren't annoyances like randomly respawning enemies in these places, so once you've cleared them out, you can focus on figuring out where to go. The biggest downside in these situations is that since most levels are pretty big, if you do have to run around or backtrack a lot because you're unsure of where to go, it can be time-consuming. The campaign ends with a final boss fight that has plenty of build-up, and while not terribly difficult, thanks largely to a pair of jump boots you're given right beforehand, there's still enough of a challenge and spectacle for it to not feel disappointing. What comes next is the expansion pack campaign Return to Nepali, which came out a year after Unreal and then later got packaged alongside it in Unreal Gold. It features some cut levels and tons of assets from the original game, but it had a different developer, Legend Entertainment. Legend were newcomers to the first-person shooter genre back then, and most of their prior experience came from developing adventure games throughout the 90s, many of which were adaptations of book series. They were even acquired by a giant book publisher at one point, and just a few months after Return to Nepali, they released their own shooter using the Unreal Engine, an interesting but mostly okay adaptation of Robert Jordan's popular fantasy series, The Wheel of Time. So, not surprisingly, Return to Nepali has a stronger focus on story. Unlike the main campaign, there's an opening cutscene that explains the premise. Your character now has voice acting, and there are mission logs after each level where your character summarizes what happened. But despite this increased focus, the end result isn't anything to get excited about. Outside of one plot twist at about the midpoint, the story has very little impact on the experience, and it's still mainly the atmosphere and gameplay that pull you along. The mission logs are pretty pointless other than adding a tiny bit of personality to your character, and you wouldn't really be missing much if you skip through them. Overall, the levels in Return to Nepali seem less intricate than the main campaign, with fewer maze-like sections, but the biggest changes are the new guns and enemies. The guns are a major disappointment in my opinion. They're all standard human military weapons and don't have unique properties like those from the main campaign. And the assault rifle that you get at the very beginning requires far less skill than any other weapon in the game. Thankfully, you do get access to your original arsenal too. The new enemies aren't great either. You have spiders, lots of spiders. Yeah, they're kinda creepy, but nothing special. Then there are these maniacal little lizard things called predators, who just bum rush you like they're trying to commit suicide by cop. And then the Space Marines, who are scarred in my brain because of how insanely tough they are compared to everything else in the expansion, including the abrupt and awkward final boss. You only encounter them once, but it's a long fight. They respawn over and over, try to surround you, and are incredibly accurate, making them way more annoying than satisfying to deal with. I usually just hide inside the ship here and try to shoot them as they come inside. What's weird about all this is that Legend Entertainment did actually know how to make better enemies, interesting weapons, and a decent story, but for some reason they just didn't do it here. Legend released their The Wheel of Time game the very same year as Return to Nepali, and while yes, they had some strong source material to work with for it, they still managed to add a creative touch to what were some pretty unique magic projectiles. The enemies aren't quite as intelligent as Scar, but a few of them can actually dodge almost as well, and the story is a lot better in that game too. With all that being said, the expansion is worth playing if you like the base game, because outside of its shortcomings, there's still a lot more of the same, which is great, especially if you mostly stick with the guns from the main campaign, and the music still rocks. Legend Entertainment would later go on to develop Unreal 2, and its underwhelming reception likely had something to do with their shutdown soon after its release. Epic would later go on to, well, I'm sure you already know what they're up to these days, and Digital Extremes is no stranger to modern success either. The multiplayer and bot match modes in Unreal served as a glimpse for what Unreal Tournament would become, and that's the direction that Epic decided to take the Unreal franchise throughout most of the 2000s. Arena shooters were big then, and Unreal Tournament was one of the best of them, so it's hard to argue with their decision. It's still disappointing that Unreal never got a worthy single-player follow-up though, and never will. Unreal is an easy recommend because it's totally free, but even if it wasn't, it'd still be an easy recommend. And not just as a history piece to see where the Unreal Engine started, it's still a really fun shooter, with an incredible atmosphere that holds up beautifully, and it's one of my favorite shooters from its era. I'll leave a download link in the comments if you're interested.